At the beginning of The Devil in Me, just after we've seen the H.H. Holmes sequence, we get a moment of pensive recollection with the curator, including one of my all-time favorite line deliveries we've ever gotten from him.
It's so good to have company. For a long time I was on my own.
I think that's a pivotal moment for explaining the curator's connection to the story of The Devil in Me, and why he's telling this story at all. We already know that he's unusually close to this story. While we don't know the exact mechanic by which the inspiration happened, it's clear that H.H. Holmes was, in some way, aping the curator in his actions. Whether it's the maze-like hallways he created, or covering his walls with the exact same nautical art the curator prefers, or the fact that his style of dress is eerily similar to our favorite Angel of Death. It's inarguable that the curator served as the inspiration for H.H. Holmes' theme and presentation, if not his actual crimes. And then H.H. Holmes died, and the curator was left without a fan. To understand what the curator's connection to the story is, and why he so thoroughly freaks out at the idea that Grantham Dumet has died, we have to delve into one of Supermassive Games' most fun devices, the aptronym. In case you're not familiar with the term, an aptronym is the device wherein a character is named based on either a characteristic about them or their role in the story, such as Spy Family's main character going by the last names Forger and Spoofy, both references to creating a fake identity, which is appropriate because he's a spy without an identity of his own. It's also applicable when a character's name is designed to give you hints about their role based on their connection to another related literary character. Supermassive Games absolutely loves this device. You can see it as far back as Until Dawn, with Josh's name being a synonym for joke or prank, which is what he claims he's doing to the other characters. It's not an accident that the Witch Trials version of Andrew in Little Hope is named Abraham, since that's the biblical character who had to decide whether to sacrifice his son when God ordered him to do so, foreshadowing this Abraham being forced to decide the fate of his ward, Mary, at the end of the game. The Quarry is absolutely nuts with both versions of this. For example, Abby's last name is Blig, the Norwegian word for shy, a description of her character, while Eliza's last name is Voorhees, designed to make us think of Mrs. Voorhees from Friday the 13th, letting us know that her son Silas is the game's Jason, and you absolutely shouldn't give him a chance to survive if you can help it. House of Ashes has my absolute favorite example of this, with characters named to reference both the plot of the game they're in, as well as the next game, The Devil in Me. Clarice Stokes and Jason Kolchak have last names that reference vampire fiction, and their first names reference serial killers, which are the threats in their game and the sequel. Frank Stone is kind of a Frankenstein because he was specifically created to be a monster. This is a device that Supermassive Games uses over and over again. They obviously enjoy doing it, and it's a fun way for audiences to get clued into what's going on in their games. Which brings us to what might be the biggest clue to explain the plot of The Devil in Me, as well as my craziest theory ever about the game, and that's saying something. This is a letter you can find in the game. It's from Lucinda Munday to Hector's father, pleading for him to return and help with their son, Hector. We know that he never did return, and that this letter was likely returned to sender by the post office when they found it to be undeliverable, because how else would Hector have it? We have no idea what the father's last name is. Munday is Lucinda's birth name. We know this because the birth announcement lists the grandparents as being Mundays as well. So we're left with two facts about Hector's father. One, he dipped out 6 months earlier. Since Lucinda gave birth to Hector just a couple of weeks before writing the letter, we can assume that his departure from her life coincided with the confirmation that she was, in fact, pregnant, a fact that becomes impossible to ignore about the 3rd month. 2. His name is Clarence. Which brings us to the point. Is Clarence an aptronym? Assuming it's not just a name picked randomly, or a tribute to some production member's family. What could the developers be trying to hint at by giving Hector's father this name? Are there any famous fictional Clarences? I asked around, and people came up with surprisingly few. There's a cartoon character named Clarence in a show of the same name, which probably isn't relevant. There's my beloved Clarence Boddicker, the iconic villain from the movie RoboCop. And while I treasure this incredible performance, there's not a lot of crossover with the events of Devil in Me. I mean, Alex Murphy is a cyborg, and Dumet builds animatronics, but that seems tenuous at best. Now, if the father was named Alex, I could see that being a connection. But Clarence had nothing to do with the cyborg in the film, other than necessitating his creation and getting stabbed in the neck by him later on. The most popular Clarence by far, and in fact, the first character that everyone I asked came up with, shares a notable trait with Hector's father, in that he's widely known by a single name. Like Rick from Casablanca, he does have a last name, it just hasn't entered the public consciousness the way his first name has. I'm speaking, of course, about Clarence Oddbody, the angel from It's a Wonderful Life, the Frank Capra movie. In case you haven't seen it, it's the story of a guy who has plenty of things go wrong for him, forcing him to wish he'd never been born, leading to his guardian angel, the aforementioned Clarence, showing him how the world might have been if he wasn't around to help people for his entire life. An angel who shows people what might have been. If Clarence is, in fact, an aptronym, it's pretty clear who it's referring to, and I've got to say, if that's the case, it actually answers a lot of questions. So let's just put it out there. Is the curator Dumet's father? Assuming the curator is some kind of an angel, there's plenty of biblical support for them interbreeding with humans, so that's not an obstacle. Clarence's sudden disappearance when he discovered that Lucinda was pregnant makes perfect sense, if he was an angel who was only with her to get her pregnant and ensure Dumet was born. Most importantly, this is set up by the curator's fascination with H.H. Holmes. It's obvious from this book of names that Holmes and Dumet's lives are a story that the curator is driving. Not so dissimilarly from how the player is driving the story of The Devil in Me and all of the other dark pictures. As he says in the opening, what good are stories without someone to experience them? After all, he was alone for such a long time. Who could blame him for looking for some kind of company? For starting to tell a story of his own? The only major question we have is, did he also have some role in the creation of H.H. Holmes? Or was he just drawn to Holmes because Holmes had some psychic impression of the curator that caused him to theme his crimes after our favorite part-time Raven? There's no way to prove this one in the game's text, of course. Sure, it answers a lot of questions like why Holmes and Dumet are themed after the curator, why the curator has chosen the story to tell, and most importantly, why he's so freaked out about the prospect of having to cross out Hector and Dumet from the story. After all, can you blame him for getting upset at the prospect of finalizing the death of his own son? Unless, of course, Clarence isn't an aptronym, and these are all just loose ends. While there's plenty of theories that are going to get proven or disproven, I feel like this one is going to remain in the ether indefinitely. For now, though, I've been the Hidden Object Guru. Thanks for watching. If you had a good time and you'd like to see more, there's buttons coming up to help with that. Questions, comments, suggestions for upcoming topics, go in the comment section below the video. Play my game, Clown in the Woods, for free over at itch.io. It's pretty good. We'll see you back here for more Devil in Me videos. But until then, I'll say that's right. Au revoir.